All right, this is part 6 of the presentation that I gave at the Cosmic Summit 2024 this past June. A presentation titled Pseudo-Carolina Bays. So let's get into what are Pseudo-Carolina Bays. Now, over the years, especially early on when I was first getting into these Carolina Bays and asking questions about Carolina Bays, they would often get dismissed by geologists, by archaeologists, even astrophysicists and things like that. I even had a geology book author one time dismiss them as various oriented lakes, and that's what I'm going to focus on, because when it comes to these Carolina Bays, they are so unique. They are so different from any other, land feature on the planet, that they're so numerous too, that they are the dominant feature. And all of the other ones, all of the other oriented lakes and windblown depressions, those are pseudo-Carolina Bays. Those are the minority when it comes to these, geologic conditions. And so I compiled this list of pseudo-Carolina Bays that I have all personally heard being used as explanations for what Carolina Bays are. And we're just going to go systematically through each one of those and show the differences and show how Carolina Bays are unique. And these are the pseudo-Carolina Bays. And so let's go ahead and start with the big dog. Let's start with the one that gets brought up the most. And that are the Thermokarst lakes. So let's get into that. And we'll talk about the differences and then actually show comparisons between Thermokarst lakes and Carolina Bays. And you guys can decide. All right, here is a collection of some Thermokarst lakes. These are true oriented lakes. They tend to be found around the Arctic Circle. There's a big grouping of them in Alaska. There's a big grouping of them in Siberia. And one of the key features that is required for Thermokarst lakes to be formed is that we have permafrost, which is permanently frozen soil. Even in the summertime where the temperatures warm up enough for the upper portion of the soil to thaw out, the soil below that remains frozen throughout the whole year. And so when it does warm up in the summertime and the snows melt, you end up with these collections of ponds with very hard bottoms because of the frozen soil. And yes, the directional winds, they're usually right next to the ocean, and so the directional winds coming off the oceans cause the ponds to swirl and to create an oriented lake towards the direction of that wind. And yes, you do see some oval shaped features in these locations where Thermokarst lakes are formed. My argument, though, is that these are not the same thing as the Carolina Bays, that these, oriented lakes that have an oval shape is different from an ellipse. It's not the same thing. And again, this is compelling if you're looking at surface level, information. But when you compare it especially using the LiDAR, and by the way, this is found up in northern Alaska. And yes, viewed under LiDAR, we see that they do have a oval shape to them, but there are some that are long, some that are squat. This is far from elliptical, and we also see that they lack those raised sandy rims. There's a lot going on here, but not quite the same as the Carolina Bays. And just for comparison, here is a location with Carolina Bays. This is close to McEntire Air Force Base in South Carolina. Far away from any source of wind, even if this wind was coming from the Laurentide ice sheet, which is what the hypothesis states, that we're really, really far away. The ocean is much farther to the east from this location, but again, when we look at it underneath the LiDAR, all right, and then viewed with LiDAR, we see that this entire landscape is covered in, almost near cookie cutter shaped Carolina Bays all over the landscape. We're nowhere near the source here of the wind, directional wind. We also have to assume that if these were created by wind and water, that every single one of these would have been ponds long enough for the swirling winds to create these elliptical shapes. I'm not seeing it. We also see quite a few Carolina Bays overlapping in this image that we do not see with the Thermokarst lakes. And probably the most important feature that is lacking from this location is the permafrost. There's never been recorded permafrost in this area, throughout the Ice Age. So, I mean, the number one key ingredient for a thermokarst lake to be formed, completely lacking from not just this location, but for most of the locations where we find these Carolina bays. I'm sure that there were places up in the Appalachian Mountains that had permafrost, but none of this location here in North or South Carolina into Georgia do we find the thermokarst, or do we find the permafrost required for thermokarst lakes to form. So why this is the most dominant explanation for Carolina bays, it's beyond me. So just to compare one more time, these are thermokarst lakes. Again, this is just one location, but we find these thermokarst lakes around the Arctic Circle. Here are the thermokarst lakes with LiDAR, and which, by the way, I do want to thank Michael Davies, because he was the one who actually sent me the files so that I can view this location in Alaska. His LiDAR can be used for the entire continental United States, but he sent me this separately so I could have a good comparison to show you guys. So thank you, Michael. Here's that location in South Carolina. And here we see that same location with the LiDAR. No comparison. No comparison. The Carolina bays are the dominant feature in this landscape, and there is no reason why we should link these to the thermokarst lakes. Not even close. All right, so when we come back, we're going to continue this investigation. We're going to look at some of these other features, like the playa lakes that we find out in Texas and in Australia. Again, over and over again, I hear people all the time say, oh, well, these are the same things that we find in the river basins of Australia. Not the same thing. Not the same thing. Those are Pseudo-Carolina bays. The kettle lakes that we find all across North America, right along the margins of the Laurentide ice sheet, those are kettle lakes. Those are oriented lakes. They're not Carolina bays. We'll get into sinkholes. We'll get into some deflation hollows. Again, all of these have been brought up to me personally as explanations for what Carolina bays are. And no, the Carolina bays are dominant features. They're the ones that all of these other oriented lakes should be compared to. All of these are Pseudo-Carolina bays. All right, guys, when we come back, we'll get into the playa lakes and the playa lake chains, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.